Claire, how did you get involved with the scholarship program? I opened my mouth to answer. David answered first. Claire leaves all that to me. The man across from us smiled. So did the woman beside him. David gave a small laugh and rested one hand against the back of my chair. She's much happier staying out of the business side of things. There was nothing openly cruel in the way he said it. He sounded affectionate, familiar, like a husband who had known his wife long enough to save everyone the trouble of waiting for her answer. Everyone laughed politely. So did I. Before the conversation could move on, a woman in a dark green evening dress stepped into our circle. David, excuse me. It was Marianne Whitaker, chairwoman of the foundation hosting the gala. She turned toward me. Claire, I need to borrow you for a minute. The board made a late change to the endowment announcement, and they want you backstage. I glanced at David. I think you mean my husband. No, Marianne said, I mean you. David spoke before I could. Why? The board wants Claire on stage when we announce the endowment. I stared at her. Why would they want me? Something changed in Marianne's expression. She opened the leather folder she was carrying. Inside was a photocopy of an old document. At the top were the words Eleanor Grant Education Fund. A few lines below that was my name. Founder Claire Grant Bennett. I read it twice. Then I looked at David. He was not reading the page. He was looking at me. He did not lean closer. He did not ask what the document was. He did not look surprised by my name. He did not look confused. He looked worried. Marianne was explaining that the program team had pulled the original archival material for the endowment announcement and that the board had decided that afternoon that the founder should be represented on stage. I heard only pieces of it. My mother's name was on the page, Eleanor Grant, and beneath it was mine, Claire Grant Bennett. I had not seen my maiden name beside the word founder in almost 18 years. Marianne touched my arm lightly. Can I take you backstage for a few minutes? David straightened. I'll come with you. Just Claire for now, Marianne said. We need to sort out the remarks, and we're already behind. Her tone was pleasant, but final. She was organizing an event, not taking sides in something she did not yet know existed. I handed my wine glass to David. His fingers closed around it. Claire, I'll be back. I followed Marianne across the ballroom. Only then did I have enough distance from the conversation to notice how quickly David had answered for me. That was one of the things my husband was good at. Answering quickly. Remembering things quickly. Making people comfortable quickly. The man who had originally asked me about the scholarship had been introduced to us less than 5 minutes earlier. I remembered that he owned several medical offices somewhere outside the city. I could not remember his name. David would have. He remembered names, companies, spouses, children, golf handicaps, recent surgeries, and which donor had just sent a daughter to college. He could meet someone once at dinner and ask about that person's mother 6 months later. At 59, I had spent more than 30 years watching him do it. David was 62 by then, and rooms like that seemed to become easier for him with every year. The ballroom was full without being loud. A string quartet played near the far wall. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of drinks. The stage was washed in soft blue light, and the foundation's logo was projected above a row of white flowers. David belonged in rooms like that. He knew how to stand in the center of a conversation without making it look as though he had moved there deliberately. He could make networking look like memory and ambition look like friendliness. I had always believed that was simply one of the ways we were different. He talked. I listened. He remembered names. I remembered conversations. When someone needed an answer quickly, David usually had one. I had never thought much about what happened when the answer was supposed to be mine. As Marianne and I crossed the ballroom, several people nodded toward David behind us. One man raised his hand in greeting. I looked back. David had not returned to the conversation. He was still watching me. I had become very good at smiling when correcting something would require more explanation than letting it pass. A few minutes earlier, when David said I left all of that to him, I had smiled too. That habit suddenly felt less harmless than it had before Marianne opened the folder. Backstage was less elegant than the ballroom. Folding tables, bottled water, extension cords, printed schedules, spare microphones, 2 volunteers whispering into headsets, and a row of chairs pushed against a wall. Marianne led me to a small table and placed the folder in front of me. I'm sorry this is rushed. The board only changed the program after the archival team pulled the original history this afternoon. So the invitation to speak was new. Whatever David knew about the fund, he had not been hiding a scheduled appearance from me. I looked at the founding document again. My mother's name is still on it. Of course. I ran one finger just above my own name. Claire Grant Bennett. The last time I remembered seeing that exact version of my name beside the fund, my hair had been mostly brown, and my children were still young enough to call me when they could not find something that was directly in front of them. The strange part was not that Marianne knew I had started the fund. The strange part was that somewhere between then and now, I had become surprised that anyone else knew it. Marianne glanced toward the stage entrance. I need to check something with the program director. I'll be right back. She walked away. I stayed at the table with the document. Seeing my mother's name pulled me backward almost immediately. Eleanor Grant saved things because she was certain they would be useful someday. Buttons, gift bags, glass jars, receipts from appliances she no longer owned, old birthday cards, rubber bands wrapped around other rubber bands. She also saved plans. She was going to finish college when my younger brother started school, and then when he finished elementary school, then when my father changed jobs, then when my grandmother became ill. Later was one of my mother's favorite words. Later when things settle down. Later when everyone needs me a little less. Later when there is more time. By the time everyone needed her less, she had spent so many years describing education as something she used to want that I think she stopped believing it still belonged to her. She never complained about it. That almost made it easier for the rest of us not to notice. I remember finding an old community college catalog after she died. It was tucked into a desk drawer beneath tax forms and warranty papers. Several courses had been circled in blue ink. Accounting, American literature, office administration. The catalog was more than 20 years old. She had kept it anyway. I sat on the floor beside her desk and held that catalog longer than I held most of the photographs I found that week. Not because the classes themselves mattered, because the circles did. They were proof that there had been a version of my mother who still expected something for herself. When she died, I was 41. David and I had already been married long enough that money rarely arrived in neat categories labeled his and mine. We had a mortgage, 2 children, college expenses approaching, retirement accounts, and a business that seemed to need more money every time it became more successful. My mother left me about $275,000. It was more money than I expected. It was also less than the word inheritance makes some people imagine. There was no mansion to sell, no family fortune, no hidden trust. It was a lifetime of savings, investments, and a house my mother had owned for years. David knew about every dollar. I remembered the night we discussed it because we were sitting at our kitchen table after dinner. The dishwasher was running. One of the children had left a backpack on the floor. David had a yellow legal pad in front of him because he used legal pads whenever he wanted to make a complicated subject feel orderly. His company was growing, not collapsing, not desperate, growing. I had learned by then that growth could make a business seem permanently hungry. There was always another truck, another lease, another employee, another piece of equipment that would supposedly pay for itself once the next stage of growth arrived. David listed possibilities. We could pay down more of the mortgage. We could strengthen retirement savings. We could put additional money aside for the children. We could invest some in the company. He stopped writing and looked at me. It's your mother's money. I don't want you to feel like I'm deciding what happens to it. I remembered that sentence years later more clearly than I remembered most of the numbers on his legal pad. There had been a time when David was very careful not to decide for me. I told him I agreed that much of the money should help our family. Then I said I wanted to keep a portion separate. He did not argue. For what? I don't know exactly yet. Something for yourself? No. The answer came out faster than I expected. I told him about the community college catalogs, about the courses my mother had circled, about how often she had used the word later. I told him I wanted to do something connected to education. For students? Not exactly. I explained what I meant. Women like my mother. Women who had stepped away from school because children came, parents got sick, marriages needed money, or life simply moved faster than their plans. Women who reached 40 or 50 and thought they had missed their chance. David listened without interrupting. That sounds like Mom, he said. He had called her Mom for years. Yes. What would you do? I don't know, scholarships maybe. He nodded slowly. You should talk to a foundation. I looked at him. A foundation? They can handle applications and all the administrative parts. You don't want people mailing scholarship forms to the house for the next 20 years. I laughed. He was right. For weeks after that conversation, the idea became more specific. The fund would support adult women returning to education after a meaningful gap. Not only traditional college, professional programs, nursing, teaching, technical training, whatever gave someone a real way back into a life she had postponed. I wanted my mother's name on it. I did not want mine. When the foundation representative later asked whether I wanted to name the program after myself, I said no before she finished the sentence. Eleanor Grant. David smiled. She'd have loved that. He was there for those conversations. He understood what I was trying to do. He helped me compare organizations. He asked questions I had not thought to ask. At one meeting, the foundation representative explained administrative fees for nearly 10 minutes while I tried not to look lost. David leaned toward me afterward and whispered, "You can ask her to explain that again." I did. There had been a version of our marriage in which David made it easier for me to ask questions. That version was real too. The amount I finally chose was $75,000. That became the first contribution to the Eleanor Grant Education Fund. It was not money David gave me. It did not come from his company. It was not a charitable program we created years later after becoming successful. It came directly from what my mother had left to me. I remember signing the first papers because my hands shook slightly. Not because I was afraid of losing the money, because turning it into a scholarship felt like turning something unfinished in my mother's life into an opening for somebody else. The foundation representative pointed to the signature line. Founder, Claire Grant Bennett. I signed. David squeezed my shoulder. On the drive home, he said, "You did something good today." I corrected him. "We did." He shook his head. "No, this one is yours." I had forgotten that conversation until Marianne placed the founding document in front of me. Backstage, I turned the photocopy over even though I knew there was nothing on the other side. Whatever had happened between that first meeting and this gala had not begun with David secretly taking something from me. He knew what I wanted. He helped me build it. That made the distance between the beginning and the present harder to explain. Marianne returned carrying a printed schedule. "Sorry, we have a few moving parts tonight." I looked at the document. When was this pulled? The original file? The program team asked for historical material while they were preparing the endowment announcement. "Did David give it to you?" "No, it was in our archive." I nodded. Of course it was. There had never been a missing record. The history had simply stopped being part of the version people repeated. Marianne sat across from me. "Are you all right?" "Yes." It was easier to say than explain why I was not sure. She gave me a moment. The first year of the fund had been small. Only a handful of scholarships were awarded. I read every application summary the foundation sent me. One woman was returning to nursing school after spending nearly 15 years raising 3 children. Another was completing a teaching credential in her 40s. A woman named Patricia wrote a thank you note in blue ink that I kept for years. She told me she had almost not applied because she thought scholarships were for young people whose lives had gone according to schedule. That sentence stayed with me. Whose lives had gone according to schedule. I kept Patricia's letter in the same drawer where I had once kept my mother's course catalog. The fund grew slowly. I made additional contributions when we could afford them. The foundation found donors who liked the purpose. Some offered matching gifts. Eventually, a local employer funded several scholarships for women entering healthcare programs. David's company grew too. As it became more successful, he began formalizing its community giving. The company contributed to the education fund. That mattered. By the time we stood in that ballroom 18 years later, it would not have been truthful for me to say the program had remained mine alone. It had not. Other donors had helped. The foundation had built the administration around it. David's company had given meaningful support. David himself had spent time at events, meetings, and donor dinners that I preferred to avoid. The beginning was mine. What followed belonged to many people. For years, I was comfortable with that. More than comfortable. I actively avoided attention. The foundation once asked for a photograph and a short profile for its annual report. I declined. A local newspaper wanted to interview several people connected to adult education. I declined that too. At a donor lunch, someone asked whether I would say a few words. I spent most of the meal hoping they would forget. When they asked again, I turned to David. "You do it." He smiled. "Gladly." That was how we often worked. David enjoyed rooms I found exhausting. He knew how to move from one conversation to another without making anyone feel dismissed. I would come home from the same event remembering one meaningful conversation and feeling as if I needed 3 days of silence. When the foundation wanted publicity, I usually told them, "Use my mother's name." That was what mattered to me. At least that was what I believed mattered. The first time I noticed the story shifting, it seemed too small to deserve a reaction. David and I were having dinner after a chamber event. A man stopped beside our table. "David, that education fund of yours is doing incredible work." I looked at my husband. I expected him to say, "Actually, Claire started that." Instead, he smiled. "We've been fortunate to help." The man nodded. "Well, keep doing it." He moved away. David picked up his fork. I kept watching the place where the man had been standing. "Oh, we've been fortunate to help" was true. David had not claimed to be the founder. He had not lied. And I was the person who had spent years saying I did not want recognition. Correcting the man would have required turning a casual compliment into an explanation about my mother, the original money, the foundation, and why David now attended most of the events. It felt awkward, self-important, unnecessary. So I let the moment pass. The first time someone called it David's scholarship, he did not claim it. He simply did not give it back. At the time, I did not understand that small moments could teach other people what version of you to remember. Over the next several years, the fund became more successful, and my connection to it became less visible. Neither change happened suddenly. At one dinner, an MC thanked David by name for his commitment to adult education. I was sitting beside him. People applauded. David squeezed my hand beneath the table. That gesture confused me. It felt like private acknowledgement in the middle of public omission. I told myself that was enough. At another event, a woman asked me whether I worked with the foundation. David answered before I did. "Claire prefers to stay behind the scenes." That was true. Or true enough. I smiled and nodded. A community magazine later ran a profile about David's business. There were photographs of the warehouse, a short section about the company's growth, and a paragraph on his civic involvement. The Eleanor Grant Education Fund appeared among the charitable programs he supported. I read the paragraph twice. No sentence said David had founded it. No sentence said I had not. His company really was supporting it by then. Still, I left the magazine open on the kitchen counter. That evening, David came home late and began opening mail. I tapped the page. "They keep thanking you for the scholarship." He glanced at it. "That's a nice piece." "That's not what I said." He looked at me. "What?" "They keep thanking you for the scholarship." David put down the envelope in his hand. "Claire, does it really matter whose name they use? The money is helping people." I stood with one hand on the counter. It was difficult to argue with. The money was helping people. The women receiving scholarships did not care whether a business magazine accurately described our marriage. My mother would not have wanted the fund turned into a contest over recognition. I had told everyone for years that I did not want attention. So I shrugged. Probably not. David picked up the next envelope. The conversation ended. Looking back, I do not think either of us understood that we had just agreed to different things. I thought I was saying I did not need applause. David seemed to hear that I did not care who owned the story. I did not recognize the difference clearly enough to name it then. Over time, the gap became harder to see. David attended more foundation events. He became the person staff members called because they knew he would answer. If an invitation came to the house, I often handed it to him. "You go." If someone wanted a comment, he gave one. If the company sponsored a table, he filled it. If there was a committee dinner, he usually knew about it before I did. There were years when he genuinely knew more about the foundation's current fundraising plans than I did. That would matter later. At the time, it looked like division of labor. One year, a foundation employee called while David was away. She asked whether we wanted to renew the company's sponsorship at the same level. I said, "You'll have to ask David. He handles that." The company contribution really was his responsibility. I did not hear how the sentence might sound after enough repetitions. David handles that. David handles the foundation. David handles the scholarship. Claire stays out of it. The gala was not the first time those ideas had existed. It was simply the first time someone placed the original record beside the newer story and made the distance visible. Marianne returned to the table carrying a printed copy of the evening program. "Would you like some water?" "Please." She handed me a bottle. I took a sip. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Who did you think started the fund?" Her expression shifted. "The older records are very clear." "That's not what I asked." She sat down. For several seconds, she studied the folder before answering. "In recent years, most of our communication has been through David." "I understand that." "And the company has made significant contributions." "Yes." She nodded. "I suppose people came to think of him as the family point person." "Did you?" "I usually called him." "Why?" "Because he responded." There was no accusation in her answer. I asked, "Did David ever tell you I started it?" Marianne paused. "Not long." "Long enough." "He usually described it as something your family supported." "Did he ever say I was the founder?" "I don't remember him saying that." I looked down at the printed program. She handed it to me. There was a section about the scholarship expansion. It described the Bennett family's long support of adult education and the generosity of David's company. His name appeared before mine. That alone would not have bothered me. Husbands and wives are listed in one order or another every day. What bothered me was the shape of the story. A person reading it would reasonably assume that David had been the central force and I had participated as his wife. Nothing in the wording was technically false. That was precisely why the distortion had been able to survive so comfortably. Marianne watched me. "If this is uncomfortable, we can adjust tonight's program." "What would you adjust?" "The introduction. We can make the history clearer." "Did you think David was the founder?" "No," she answered quickly. Then she added, "I thought he was the main person responsible for the fund now." "Why?" "Because he has been the person speaking for it." I looked at her. She seemed to hear the weight of the sentence after she said it. "I'm sorry, I don't mean speaking for you." "It's all right." But the distinction stayed with me. Speaking for the fund. Speaking for the family. Speaking for me. Nothing illegal had happened. The paperwork had always existed, and the money had gone where it was supposed to go. The problem was not hidden in a bank account or buried in a false document. It was in the story people had learned to tell. I folded the program once, then opened it again. "I need to talk to David." "Of course." "How much time do we have?" "About 20 minutes." I stood. As I left backstage, I knew exactly what I wanted to ask. Not whether David attended more events than I did. He had. Not whether his company contributed. It did. Not whether I avoided publicity. I had. I wanted to know whether he understood what people believed. And if he did, what he had done with that knowledge. I found him in a corridor outside the ballroom. The hallway was quieter than the event space, but every time the doors opened, music and conversation spilled out and disappeared again. Framed photographs from previous galas covered the walls. In one of them, David stood beside a former foundation president holding a large ceremonial check. I had probably been at that event. I could not remember. David was looking at his phone when I approached. He put it away. "Everything okay?" I stopped several feet from him. "Did you ever correct them?" His face remained neutral. "Correct who?" "The foundation, the donors, anyone." "About what?" "That I started the fund." He looked toward the ballroom. "Claire? Did you?" "They know it's a family fund." "That isn't what I asked." He exhaled. "This is not the place." "Then give me an answer, and it won't take long." His jaw tightened. "If people know you've been involved." "How?" "What do you mean, how?" "How do they know?" David rubbed a hand across his chin. "The foundation has the records. Marianne has the records. She also thought you were the person responsible for the fund." "She didn't say that." "She did." "What exactly did she say?" "Why does that matter?" "Because I don't like being accused based on somebody else's interpretation." "I haven't accused you of anything." "You came out here asking whether I corrected people." "Then answer." A waiter carrying an empty tray walked through the corridor. We both waited until he passed. David lowered his voice. "Claire, the company has put a lot of money into that program. I know the company has contributed. I've attended almost every event they've asked me to attend." "You have." "You didn't want to." "Correct." "You sent me." Yes. He spread his hands. So what exactly are we arguing about? I watched him. Did you know they thought it was yours? For the first time, he did not have an immediate answer. David? At some point, probably. At some point. What do you want me to say? The truth. His expression hardened. Fine, yes, I knew people associated me with it. There it was. Not everything. Enough! And you didn't correct them. Not every time. Most times? He looked away. I followed his eyes to one of the framed photographs. David at a podium. A scholarship logo behind him. When did that start? I don't know. Try. He was quiet for a few seconds. People already knew me through the business. I was the one showing up. I was the one taking the calls. When someone said something about the scholarship, I wasn't going to stop every conversation and explain 18 years of family history. Family history. Yes. The beginning wasn't family history. It was my mother's money. And then the company supported it for years. Yes. And donors expanded it. Yes. And you didn't want your name used. I said I didn't want publicity. David shook his head. You're making distinctions now that you never made then. The sentence bothered me because it was partly true. I asked, when people started thinking you were responsible for it, did that help you? His eyes narrowed. Help me how? Your reputation, your company, your board relationships. Claire, everyone in those rooms helps everyone else's reputation. That's how community work functions. So it helped. That's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? I'm saying there wasn't some moment where I decided to take something from you. I didn't say there was. You're acting like there was. I asked whether you knew. And I answered. You knew. Yes. And you let it continue. David looked genuinely frustrated now. Because correcting it every time would have been ridiculous. Why? Because it didn't change the work. It changed who people thought did the work. Why does that matter if the work got done? I stared at him. It was the same argument from the kitchen counter years earlier. The money is helping people. He was not inventing a defense because he had been cornered. He believed it. Maybe he had believed it for years. That made the argument harder, not easier. I asked, when did it become easier not to correct them? His face changed. He seemed to understand the question before answering. Claire? When? He looked toward the ballroom again, then back at me. It was easier. The words were quiet. No speech. No elaborate justification. Just that. It was easier, I repeated. Yes. Easier for who? For everyone. I laughed once. Everyone. Come on. No, explain it. The foundation knew who to call. I knew the donors. The company was already involved. You hated those events. They asked questions. I answered them. I wasn't hiding you. But you stopped mentioning me. Not deliberately. You just said you knew. Knowing something isn't the same as creating it. That's convenient. He rubbed his forehead. You're making me sound calculated. Was it calculated? No. Then what was it? It became the way things worked. That answer felt closer to the truth than anything else he had said. It became the way things worked. No single decision. No dramatic theft. A habit that became convenient for one of us and easy to ignore for the other. Did you like that people associated the fund with you? David looked offended. That's not fair. Why? Because you're asking whether I enjoyed being respected for work I actually did. You did work for it. Exactly. You didn't start it. I never said I did. You didn't have to. His mouth tightened. The ballroom doors opened behind us. A burst of applause reached the corridor. We waited. When the doors closed again, David stepped closer. You told me you didn't want the credit. I did not answer. He saw it. More than once. I wanted to say that was not true. The words were already forming. Then memory interrupted them. A donor lunch. David asking whether I wanted to speak. Me saying, I don't care whose name is on the program, just go. A foundation email asking for a profile. Me forwarding it to David with the words, you handle this. A conversation after an event when I said, I don't need anyone clapping because I wrote a check. He was not inventing those moments. I had given them to him. David watched my face. You remember? I remember. So what exactly was I supposed to think? Before I could answer, a volunteer appeared at the end of the corridor. Mrs. Bennett? Yes? Marianne asked me to tell you we're about 15 minutes out. Thank you. The volunteer disappeared. David waited until we were alone again. Then he said, "You can't spend 18 years telling me you don't want attention and then punish me because people paid attention to me instead." That was the strongest thing he could have said because it contained enough truth to stop me. I had refused interviews. I had skipped events. I had handed him invitations. I had told him to handle the foundation. There were years when he genuinely knew more about current fundraising plans than I did. Some of the distance between me and the fund was distance I had asked for. I leaned against the wall. David's voice softened. "Claire, no one took the fund from you." "I know. The money went where it was supposed to go." "Yes. Women receive scholarships." "I know. The company contributed for years." "I'm not denying any of that." "Then what are we doing?" I did not have a clean answer. If David had forged my name, the argument would have been simple. If he had taken money from the fund, it would have been simple. If he had stood at a podium and announced that he founded it, it would have been simple. Instead, we were arguing about years of choices that had been individually reasonable, mine included. I had not been tricked into every step. I had asked for privacy. I had delegated. I had avoided rooms that made me uncomfortable. David had filled the empty space. For years, that had felt like partnership. I looked at him. When did me not wanting a microphone become me not knowing anything? He frowned. It didn't. Didn't it? No. Then why did you answer for me tonight? What? That man asked me how I got involved with the scholarship. David shook his head. I was making conversation. You told him I leave all that to you. Because you do. Do I? His face changed. You know what I mean. I'm not sure I do. Claire, you don't deal with the foundation day to day. I don't deal with the foundation day to day. That's what I said. No, you said I leave all that to you. He looked irritated. You're parsing words. Maybe I should have done that sooner. He crossed his arms. What is that supposed to mean? I thought about Marianne asking me whether I was comfortable speaking. It had felt unusual only because she had waited for my answer. When did you start answering questions about what I wanted without asking me? David stared at me. That's not fair. Maybe not. I meant it. I was not trying to construct a perfect case. I was trying to understand the shape of something I had helped build. He said, you told me to represent us. At events. You told me to handle the foundation. The calls, the dinners, the company contribution. What difference does that make? A lot, apparently. He looked at me as if I had changed the rules after the game ended. Maybe from his side, that was exactly how it felt. I said I didn't need the credit. I never said you could let people believe I had nothing to do with it. No one believes that. Marianne thought you were the person responsible for a fund I started with my mother's money, because I'm the person she talks to. Exactly. He went quiet. The scholarship itself was no longer the part bothering me most. The sentence David used at the gala had been too familiar. Claire leaves all that to me. I had heard versions of it in other rooms. Not about the scholarship. About me. Years earlier, someone at a business dinner asked whether I might be interested in joining a local arts board. I had not even considered it before. David answered first. That's not really Claire's thing. The truth was I probably would have said no. But no one asked me after that. I laughed. The conversation moved on. At the time, it seemed harmless. Another year, we renovated a property we owned. I told David I did not care which contractor handled scheduling. I did not want to coordinate plumbers, electricians, deliveries, and inspections. At a design meeting, the architect asked what I thought about changing part of the kitchen layout. David said, Claire doesn't care about the details. I looked at him. I care about those details. He seemed surprised. I thought you said you didn't. I said I didn't care who scheduled the contractors. He apologized. We moved on. I forgot about it. At a family gathering, someone invited us to a weekend event. David said, Claire won't want to go. I laughed. He knows me. Everyone laughed too. He was probably right. I did not go. That was what made the pattern difficult to see. Sometimes the person speaking for you knows you well enough that the answer is usually correct. And when the answer is correct 9 times, no one notices that you were not asked the 10th. There had been restaurant decisions, travel plans, business invitations, community events, small investments, people asking whether I was interested in something while looking at David. David answering, me letting him, not because he threatened me, not because I was afraid, because he was efficient, because he often knew the answer, because correcting him publicly felt petty, because if I disagreed, I could always tell him later, except sometimes later never came. My mother's word, later. At first, David handled things I did not enjoy. Then he described the things I did not enjoy. After that, he began predicting what I would want. Eventually, other people treated his prediction as my answer. No one had announced the change. It had happened through repetition. There were times when I encouraged it. I had looked at him before answering questions because I was used to him filling in details. I had said whatever David thinks when the subject bored me. I had laughed when people joked that he was the organized one. I had let convenience become character. Every time I decided something was not worth correcting, the next correction became harder. Standing in the corridor, I realized David had not simply become the public face of the fund. He had become an interpreter of me. Not because he woke up one morning and decided my voice was unnecessary, because for years his answer had been faster, and I had often allowed it. David was still watching me. What? I shook my head. I need to get backstage. Are we finished? No. He looked tired. Then when are we going to finish this? I don't know. That answer seemed to bother him. For most of our marriage, David liked decisions to move toward completion. Problem. Discussion. Solution. Next problem. I had appreciated that about him many times. But somewhere along the way, I had become one of the things he thought he was supposed to manage. When I returned backstage, Marianne was reviewing the order of speakers. She looked up immediately. Are you comfortable speaking? I noticed the question because she asked me. Not David. Me. I think so. If you're not, we can have someone else handle the announcement. No. She waited. I want to do it. All right. She handed me a page. These are suggested talking points. You don't have to use them. I read the first line. It thanked David and me for our family's long commitment to the scholarship. Nothing about the beginning. Nothing about Eleanor beyond the name of the fund. Can I change this? Of course. All of it? It's your remarks. That simple answer unsettled me more than it should have. My remarks. I sat down with the page. For the first time that evening, no one was telling me what version of myself belonged in the room. I crossed out the opening sentence. Then stopped. I had no idea what I wanted to say instead. A few minutes later, David appeared backstage. Marianne glanced between us. We're about 5 minutes away. I'll give you a minute. She walked toward the stage entrance. David looked at the paper in my hand. What are you going to say? I don't know yet. Claire. What? Let me talk to Marianne. No. We can fix the program. No. We can update the website. If the history isn't clear enough, we can change it. I looked at him. We? What? You keep saying we. Because this affects both of us. It does, but you don't get to fix this for me. His expression tightened. I'm trying to help. I know. I believed him. David had spent decades helping. He took things off my plate. He remembered deadlines. He dealt with difficult people. He solved problems before I knew they had become problems. For years, that had been one of the reasons I trusted him. He had become so accustomed to helping that he no longer seemed to notice when help required my absence. He looked toward the curtain. Are you going to embarrass me? I studied him. No. You hesitated. I'm going to tell the truth. About what? The fund. And me? I haven't decided. For the first time that evening, I saw something that looked like fear rather than irritation. Not fear that I had discovered a crime. Fear that people who respected him might suddenly reinterpret years of conversations. I could do that. The possibility was real. I could walk onto the stage and explain everything. I could tell the room that David knew people associated the fund with him. I could tell them he had stopped correcting those assumptions because it was easier. I could explain the magazine article, the introductions, the conversations he answered before I did. I could make the room look at him. For a few seconds I imagined it. There was satisfaction in the thought. That bothered me. Then I thought about my mother. The fund existed because a woman who kept postponing her own education had left me enough money to give other women another chance. If I used that stage to punish David, the fund would become a weapon in our marriage. The story would become about him. Again. I did not want that. I set the page on my lap. I won't discuss our marriage. David's shoulders loosened. But I am correcting the history. He nodded. Fine. The word irritated me. That's not permission I'm asking for. I didn't mean it that way. I know. Marianne returned. 2 minutes. She looked at me. How would you like to be introduced? My automatic answer almost came out. Whatever you normally use. Then I stopped. Claire Bennett is fine. Of course. She made a note. David watched me. I could hear the MC beyond the curtain. Applause rose, then settled. My hands were cold. I was not suddenly brave. I still hated stages. I still hated the moment before hundreds of people turned toward me. I still preferred one meaningful conversation to an evening of introductions. My decision had not changed my personality. It had changed who was allowed to define it. David said quietly, "You don't have to prove anything." I looked at him. I'm not trying to. That was true. I had spent years telling myself I did not need anyone to know. For the first time, I understood that was not the same as letting them know something that was not true. The stage manager lifted a hand. You're next. The curtain opened. The stage lights were brighter than I expected. For a few seconds, I could not see individual faces. The audience became tables, white cloth glassware, dark jackets, colored dresses, and the glow of the projection screen behind the podium. I heard my name. Claire Bennett. Not Mrs. David Bennett. Just mine. I walked toward the microphone. My heel caught slightly on the edge of the carpet. No one seemed to notice. I placed the suggested talking points on the podium. The MC thanked the donors who had helped expand the scholarship and mentioned David's company among the long-term supporters. Then he stepped aside. I looked toward the audience. Somewhere off to the side, David stood with his hands folded in front of him. Marianne was near the stage entrance. I glanced at the page. Then I set it aside. Before I talk about what this fund has become, I want to correct one thing about how it began. The room did not become perfectly silent. A chair moved. Someone near the back set down a glass. A server slipped quietly through a side door. But enough attention turned toward me that I could feel the difference. The Eleanor Grant Education Fund began 18 years ago with money my mother left to me. I paused. My mother's name was Eleanor Grant. The words sounded different through a microphone. She wanted to finish her education when she was young, but life kept giving her reasons to postpone it. Children, family responsibilities, work, people who needed her. She believed there would always be a better time later. My voice moved slightly on the last word. I let it. Later never really came for her. I looked toward the fund's name on the screen. When she died, she left me an inheritance. I used $75,000 of it to establish this fund because I wanted women whose lives had been interrupted to know that interrupted did not have to mean finished. A few faces in front of me changed. Not shock. Recognition. At the beginning, the fund was small. I read stories from almost every woman who received help. Some were returning to nursing programs. Some were finishing teaching degrees. Some had spent 15 or 20 years caring for children, parents, or spouses before deciding they were allowed to make another plan for themselves. I paused. My mother spent much of her life believing that her own plan could wait. I wanted her name attached to a place where waiting did not have to become giving up. I glanced at David. He did not look away. The fund did not stay small because of me. The foundation built the program. Donors added to it. Businesses supported it. David's company became a generous contributor and has remained one for years. That sentence mattered to me. Accuracy could not mean replacing one incomplete story with another. Many people in this room helped this program become far larger than anything I could have created alone. So I am not standing here to claim everything that came after. I only want to make sure we remember the beginning accurately. The words settled in the room. Then I told them about Patricia's thank you note. About the woman who almost did not apply because she thought scholarships were for people whose lives had gone according to schedule. I kept that note because very few lives go according to schedule. A few people smiled. Sometimes the plan changes because of choices we make, sometimes because of choices made for us, sometimes because the people we love need something and we give it. There is nothing shameful about that, but there should still be a way back. I looked at the fund's name one more time. That was what Eleanor never had. I am grateful that some of the women supported by this fund have. I thanked the foundation. I thanked the donors. I thanked the scholarship recipients who had trusted strangers with enough of their stories to ask for help. Then I stepped away. There was a brief pause. Applause began. It was not a standing ovation. I was relieved. People clapped. Some smiled. A few turned towards the tables where current scholarship recipients were seated. Later, when those women were recognized, more people stood. That was where the attention belonged. As I came down the steps, Marianne touched my elbow. That was exactly right. Thank you. My hands were shaking slightly now that I was finished. A woman approached me near the bottom of the stairs. I recognized her face from an old foundation newsletter but could not remember her name. I received one of the scholarships years ago, she said. Oh, I went back for my nursing degree. I smiled. Then I'm glad you're here. She hesitated. I didn't know you started it. For most of the evening, that sentence might have hurt. Instead, I said, most people didn't. She smiled. Well, now I do. No music changed. No one gathered around us. David was not publicly exposed. Nothing dramatic happened. But I carried those 4 words with me for the rest of the evening. Now I do. David waited near the edge of the room. When I reached him, he said, "You did well." That wasn't the point. I know. I looked at him. This time I believed he did. We returned to our table. The rest of the gala was different in ways that would have been invisible to anyone watching us. People came over. Some asked about my mother. Some asked about the early years of the fund. One man apologized because he had always assumed David had started it. I told him there was nothing to apologize for. The assumption had not come from nowhere. When people asked me questions, I answered. David did not interrupt. Once someone asked about a future foundation project. I saw David almost turn toward me with an answer. He stopped himself. The pause was tiny. I noticed it. We stayed until the end. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for almost 20 minutes. David drove. I watched streetlights move across the passenger window. Finally, he said, "I never meant to erase you." I kept looking outside. I know. He glanced at me. You know? I believe you. His shoulders relaxed slightly. Then I said, "That's part of what makes this hard." He was quiet again. If David had planned everything, anger would have been easier. If there had been one decision, one lie, one moment when he deliberately decided to take something from me, then I could have pointed to it. There was no single moment. There were hundreds of small ones. A question answered for me. An invitation accepted for me. A preference described before I spoke. A misunderstanding left alone because correcting it seemed awkward. A responsibility I handed over because I did not enjoy it. A responsibility he kept because he did. None of those moments looked dangerous alone. Together they built a version of me that other people seemed to know. A woman who stayed out of things. A woman who was not interested in the details. A woman who preferred David to handle everything complicated. Sometimes the person who makes you smaller is not trying to hurt you. Sometimes they have simply grown comfortable with the space you stopped taking up. The foundation called me 3 days after the gala. Not David. Me. Marianne asked whether I had time to talk. She told me the communications team was updating the official history of the fund. We want to make sure we get it right. I smiled at the phrase. Thank you. Would you like your mother's story included? Yes. Would you like your own name listed as founder? My first instinct arrived automatically. It doesn't matter. I could feel the words before I said them. Then I stopped. Yes. It felt strangely formal. Marianne did not congratulate me for saying it. She simply made a note. All right. The fund remained the Eleanor Grant Education Fund. That mattered most. My name appeared in the history as the founder. David's company remained listed among major supporters. That was accurate too. I asked that future communication concerning my role come directly to me. Marianne said, "Of course." Again, no drama. Just a change in who was asked. She invited me to attend several meetings of an advisory committee. My immediate instinct was to decline. I heard the answer inside my head. Not my thing. Then I realized I had not asked what the committee did. What would the commitment be? Marianne explained. Several meetings each year. Reviewing scholarship priorities. Discussing outreach. No fundraising requirement. No expectation that I become a public spokesperson. I listened. Then I said I'd like to attend a few meetings before I decide. That sounds reasonable. When I ended the call, I sat at the kitchen table for a while. What felt new was not that I had agreed to something. I had not. What felt new was that I had asked enough questions to make my own decision later. David and I did not repair our marriage in one conversation. For a while, he became overly careful. Someone would ask where we wanted to eat, and he would turn toward me as if choosing a restaurant without written permission might prove my entire point. It became irritating within a week. One evening he asked, "Do you care which grocery store I stop at?" I stared at him. "David." "What?" "I'm not asking you to forget everything you know about me." He looked tired. "Then what are you asking?" "To remember that knowing me isn't the same as being me." He sat with that. I did too. There were harder conversations. David still believed I had allowed the scholarship situation to become ambiguous. He was right. I still believed he had benefited from that ambiguity after he understood it. I was right too. Marriage did not provide us with a judge who could assign percentages of responsibility and announce which person had won. We had to live with both truths. I told him there was a difference between saying, "I don't want to attend the dinner," and having him tell people, "Claire isn't interested in any of this." He said he had never meant those sentences so broadly. I believed him. Then I asked why he had kept using them. He had no good answer. Eventually he said, "Because people understood what I meant." Did they? He looked at me. That question stayed between us. I began noticing my own habits too. That part was uncomfortable. A friend asked what I thought about a new restaurant. Before answering, I looked toward David. I had no idea I did that. At a dinner several weeks later, someone asked whether I would be interested in helping with a foundation project. David opened his mouth, then stopped. He looked at me. I answered, "No, I don't think that one is for me, but thank you for asking." No one at the table noticed anything unusual. I did. At another event, a woman asked whether David and I would attend a fundraiser in the fall. David said, "I think I will." Then he looked at me. "What about you?" I checked the date. "I might. Send me the information." Again, tiny. That was how the original problem had grown. Tiny moment after tiny moment. It seemed fitting that the repair happened the same way. Not through one giant declaration. Through questions. Through pauses. Through letting an answer remain unfinished until I gave mine. There were still times when David slipped. Once, someone asked whether I wanted to join him on a business trip. He said, "Claire hates those trips." I raised an eyebrow. He stopped. "Sorry, do you want to go?" "No." He laughed. "See, I knew." "I know you knew." "Then why did I have to ask?" "Because it was my no." He thought about that. Fair. We were not suddenly a different couple. We were a couple learning to notice something that had been invisible because it had become normal. Several weeks after the gala, another invitation arrived in the mail. It was for a foundation dinner. The envelope was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. David Bennett. I stood at the kitchen counter and looked at it longer than necessary. There was a time when that would not have bothered me. Maybe eventually it would not bother me again. Names were complicated. I had chosen David's last name when we married. I did not regret it. I had loved seeing Claire Bennett on our first mailbox. I had loved sharing a family name with our children. The problem was never the name Bennett. The problem was how easily my own name had become a footnote inside someone else's. I opened the envelope. The dinner was scheduled for the following month. David came into the kitchen while I was reading it. He set his keys down. "What is that?" "Foundation dinner." He pulled out his phone and opened the calendar. "I can RSVP for us." The sentence was so ordinary that my old answer arrived automatically. "Sure." I almost said it. Instead, I looked at him. "Ask me first." David stopped. For a second, I could see the old reflex and the new understanding meet on his face. Then he lowered the phone. "Do you want to go?" I looked at the invitation again. I checked the date. I thought about the room, the people, the conversations. I did not decide immediately. David waited. "That might have been the most important part." "I think I do," I said, "but let me check one thing before we answer." "Okay?" He left the invitation on the counter. No argument. No speech. No promise that he would never answer for me again. Just space for an answer that belonged to me. It was such a small question. I could not remember the last time it had felt that important. Being quiet is not the same as having nothing to say. Choosing not to take credit is not permission for someone else to take your place. If Claire repeatedly said she did not want recognition, when do you think David crossed the line? When he stopped correcting people? Or when he started speaking for her? If stories about the truths people hide inside long marriages stay with you, subscribe to Scarred Minds.